keeps their dogs inside? Who here keeps their dogs outside? Now, where does that dog belong? Consumers often equate their companion animals with production animals. So I'd like to apply that same question to the dairy industry. Where do dairy cows belong? In barns, also known as conventional or confined systems, or on pasture. Consumers often believe that pasture offers a more natural life, thus creating the misconception that housing dairy cows in conventional housing systems is inhumane. But why does this misconception matter? Due to the media, consumers have gained an increased concern for animal welfare, thus creating the association of confinement with suffering and pastures with freedom. Consumers also believe that conventional systems restrict natural behaviors, specifically grazing, and increase health risks such as lameness and mastitis. Now, further supporting this perception, Shipley and others performed a survey where they asked participants, should dairy cows be provided access to pasture? 96% answered yes, and 4% answered no. Out of the 96% of individuals who thought dairy cows should be provided access to pasture were then further asked, what is your involvement with the dairy industry? With answers including dairy farm owner, student or teacher, veterinarian or industry professional, animal advocate, and no involvement. 62.2% of individuals who thought dairy cows should be provided access to pasture had no involvement with the dairy industry, further showing that consumers have a view that pasture offers a more natural life. But when did we move dairy cows into conventional housing systems in the first place? Producers started moving their herds into conventional housing systems in the mid-1800s for protective measures against climate extremes and predators. But at this time, it was not yet full intensive or year-round. Some of the earliest forms of conventional housing systems include tie stall or stanchions, where dairy cows are tied to a stall or kept in a head gate with very little free movement. A pivotal milestone in the dairy industry includes the invention of the free stall in 1959 by Adolf Owen, with the free stall then entering routine use in the 1960s. The National Animal Health Monitoring System reported that 64% of all operations were in conventional housing systems, which encompassed 82% of all dairy cows. The United States Department of Agriculture then evaluated management practices in the dairy industry, including primary housing type by operation, including tie stall or stanchion, free stalls without outside access to pasture, free stalls with outside access, and full-time pasture-based systems, then separating operation by size, with very small, small, medium, and large. In this graph, we can clearly see that medium and large operations favor free stalls without outside access to pasture, and very small and small operations favor tie stall or stanchion. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the combined system, with only 7.5% of all operations being full-time pasture-based systems, with very small and small operations being a large percentage of this. This aligns with the current trend we see today in the dairy industry, with smaller herd sizes moving towards more full-time pasture-based systems. But what are some reasons that we move dairy cows into fully confined systems in the first place? Again, dairy cows were moved into these housing systems to protect them against climate extremes. Additionally, the human population is expected to reach 9 billion by 2050, which means we need to make more with less. Now, with larger herds, producers found it easier to intensively monitor their cows in conventional housing systems for early illness detection. Another trend we see in the industry today is labor shortages, with cow-to-employee ratio being 105-1. Now, with less interest in a career in the dairy industry, producers have gained an increased interest in precision livestock technologies for daily farm management tasks. Finally, there is limited land availability with an increased competition for land. Referring back to Shipley and others' survey, consumers that thought dairy cows should be provided access to pasture, this was based on the belief that pasture offers a more natural life and is better for welfare. But we can evaluate quality of welfare based on several components, including cow comfort. Cow comfort is defined as the combination of elements in the cow's immediate environment that positively support its well-being, health, comfort, reproduction, and production. Additionally, Fraser created the 3 domains of animal welfare, including biological functioning, natural behaviors, and effective state, which were derived from the 5 freedoms, which is a very well-known guideline for the humane treatment and well-being of farm animals. Finally, the Farm Animal Welfare Committee created the Welfare Quality Assessment Protocol, which is in place to ensure quality welfare in both conventional and pasture-based systems. The Welfare Quality Assessment Protocol is strongly based on animal-based measurements and is comprised of 4 principles, including good housing, good feeding, good health, and appropriate behavior. But there's advantages to both conventional and pasture-based systems. Some advantages in conventional housing systems include that it is easier to ensure biosecurity measures. And producers also found that it was easier to regulate the microclimate in these systems, with ventilation, fans, and sprinklers. Also, in conventional housing systems, we could provide cows with a consistent feed availability, and there is flexibility in design, which is in place to accommodate for location, herd size, and financial position of the producer. But there's also advantages in pasture-based systems as well. Pasture has been shown to offer physiological benefits such as freedom and exploration, and overall has consumer favor. Studies have also shown that pasture offers better hoof health with lower risk of hoof and limb issues, and there's a lower initial investment to pasture compared to conventional housing systems. But modern conventional housing facilities are designed to mimic pasture life and are designed specifically for comfort and hygiene, with sand beds, rubber mats, and brushes for environmental enrichment. These modern facilities also allow choice of lying, feeding, and social interaction, and cow comfort audits and welfare scoring are in place to ensure quality welfare. Top-tier freestall barns are now scoring 85 plus on welfare scores, which is either better or just as good as pasture systems. Now, when comparing pasture versus conventional, there are several factors that we need to take into consideration, including health. Lameness is a significant challenge in the dairy industry. A study by Cook in 2013 compared several studies which compared the prevalence of lameness in both conventional and pasture-based systems. This table indicated that pastures do provide softer ground with less risk of hoof and limb issues and better hoof health. But across all studies, prevalence of lameness differed and was dependent on flooring and bedding types. A study by Adams and others indicated that there was a lower prevalence of lameness in operations that use sand beds and rubber mats compared to operations that use concrete flooring and straw bedding. Now, lameness is not just a concern in conventional housing systems. It can also be a challenge in pasture-based systems as well. With poorly conditioned pastures, it can reduce hoof health and can increase the risk of hoof and limb issues. Now, mastitis is also a significant health challenge in the dairy industry. A study by Washburn and others compared the prevalence of mastitis in confined versus pasture-based dairy cows. This study indicated that there was a 51% prevalence of mastitis in confined dairy cows compared to a 31.4% of prevalence in pasture-housed dairy cows. A study by Waters. Mastitis is also dependent on several different factors, including hygiene, bedding material, and management practices. A study by Waters and others evaluated the relationship of post-milking standing duration and the risk of intermammary infections in freestall housed dairy cows milked 3 times a day. Now, a management practice like post-milking standing duration, this study did show that a post-milking standing duration of 90 to 120 minutes, along with supplying feed after milking and low stocking density, can reduce the risk of intermammary infections in freestall housed dairy cows. Now, along with lameness, mastitis is also a concern in pasture-housed cows. There was a higher prevalence of summer mastitis in pasture-housed dairy cows, which summer mastitis is spread by flying insects. Now, mastitis and lameness have the potential for production loss. So what does milk production and composition look like in these two systems? National milk production is expected to rise at a rate of 1.2% and reach 253.1 billion pounds in 2034. A study by O'Callahan and others compared milk production and composition in cows fed a total mixed ration in a totally confined system compared to cows that just consumed grass on pasture. This study indicated that cows that consumed a total mixed ration had higher milk yields compared to cows that just consumed grass on pasture. This study also indicated a significant difference in milk solids, protein, and fat in milk composition of these two different systems. Now, when referring to a total mixed ration or just grass fed on pasture, what does feed efficiency and productivity look like in these two different systems? A study by Brito and Silva indicated that conventionally housed dairy cows had higher milk yields, were more efficient with what they consumed, and were more productive. This study also indicated that pasture-housed dairy cows had a high dry matter intake compared to conventionally housed cows, but they were still less efficient compared to conventionally housed dairy cows that were fed a total mixed ration. This indicates that pasture-housed dairy cows can consume just as much or even more than conventional cows and still be less efficient. A study by Culver and Mullen indicated that a low dry matter intake was the limiting factor for milk production. This study also used a high-quality pasture, but high-quality pasture may not always be feasible. The USDA National Agriculture Statistics Service reported that as of September this year, pasture and range conditions have decreased, with an increase in very poor to poor quality pastures. This indicates that high-quality pasture may not always be feasible, and there's an increase in low-quality pasture. That is why consumers decided to move their herds into conventional housing systems so we can supply these cows with a balanced diet with a total mixed ration. The study by Culver and Mullen also indicated a decrease in body condition scores, were at greater risk for a negative energy balance, and were at increased risk for malnutrition. This indicates that pasture may not always be able to provide for the nutritional needs of modern high-producing dairy cows. Now, with herd size increasing, the solution may be, let's move all of these dairy cows onto pasture so they can consume just as much or more than conventionally housed cows. But there are several limitations when referring to land availability. There is 2.3 billion acres in the United States, 659 million acres of grassland pasture, and 9.5 million dairy cows in the United States. Now, if we consider 2 to 3 acres per cow, this may seem feasible, but there are several limitations for land availability, including competition for land use. With the increasing population, that means we need more land to house more people. So there is a competition between the population, crop production to feed the growing population, and grassland pasture for all grazing livestock species, including dairy cows. Additionally, there's environmental and ecological restraints. Only 15% of U.S. grassland pasture that is suitable for new dairy herds is available without affecting biodiversity, carbon regulations, and water quality. Finally, there's economical and practical restraints. Not all producers can afford the price of land in their location. Now, I have referred to a lot of what consumers think about conventional versus pasture-based systems. But what do producers think? A study by Smith and others interviewed 15 Canadian farmers, asking them why or why not should we provide access to pasture for dairy cows. In this interview, they indicated 5 themes: climate condition, cow comfort, economics, farm infrastructure, and management. For climate conditions, several producers in more mild climates found it feasible and ideal to move their herds onto pasture-based systems. But other producers in more unstable climate conditions, such as Mississippi, producers did not feel it ideal or feasible to move their cows onto pasture. Now, with cow comfort, several producers expressed that conventional housing systems offered consistency, but other producers said that pastures offer freedom and the expression of playful behaviors. Now, for economics and farm infrastructure, several producers in more suburb areas could not afford the price of land and did not have easy accessibility to land. But other producers in more rural areas that could afford the price of land and had easy accessibility to land thought it more feasible and ideal to move their dairy cows onto pasture. Now, finally, with management, Some producers thought that it was easier to manage their large herds in conventional housing systems. Then other producers expressed that with their smaller herds, they found it easier to manage their cows out on pasture. But there is a solution for both producers and consumers with hybrid mixed systems by combining seasonal pasture and conventional housing systems. Specifically, I'd like to highlight that welfare and production depend more on management than housing type. So by combining conventional housing and pasture, we can create a balance of producer needs and consumer desires by still achieving high milk yields and better nutrient management with the combination of grass on pasture and a total mixed ration in conventional housing systems. Also, by combining conventional with pasture, we can achieve superior welfare with the freedom and exploration in pasture and the consistency provided in a conventional housing system. I'd also like to highlight this quote by Peter Drucker. The quality of management is the single most important factor in determining the success of a business, indicating that management is key to maximize benefits. So in conclusion, consumers favor pasture-based dairy systems, and they associate confinement with suffering and pastures with freedom. But modern conventional facilities are designed for comfort, and high-quality comfort can lead to increased production. Dairy cow welfare is also multidimensional, dependent on several factors, not just conventional versus pasture. Finally, consumers benefit from education. A study by Ferris and others indicated that after the general public was given a tour of a modern dairy facility, 95% of them left with a more positive outlook on the industry. Now, dogs can be comfortable in both inside and outside, just as dairy cows can be comfortable in conventional or pasture-based systems or a combination of both. But we should prioritize management over the battle of conventional versus pasture. Thank you. Any questions?